And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Willow Caelon, who was crushed by a semi-truck and had a near-death experience. Willow, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Well, Willow, let's start on the day that you got crushed and go from there.
Well, I was 17 and I was working two jobs. And so I had just left my first job and was headed toward my second job of the day. And I was on one of the main roads in my area. And I had to stop and wait for a line of cars to go by before I could turn off onto a side road. And there was like a curve behind me a little bit, so you couldn't really see too far behind you. But I was sitting there and I remember checking the rearview mirror really quick right before I was about to turn. And as soon as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw this huge truck coming up behind me too quickly. And it was so close to me. It was like this split second understanding that I was going to be hit by this vehicle. And it was ended up being an F-350 that rear-ended me. And they were some bystanders, and they, like on the intersection, said that truck was probably going around 70, and it was a 55 mile per hour area. So they were going way faster than they should have been. And when they rear-ended me, it launched me into oncoming traffic, where there was a semi-truck coming at me. And I remember in that moment seeing the semi-truck come toward me and trying to get out of my car. It was like a roll down manual window, because this was an old Nissan 4-door stick shift manual car. And it was like a 1987. It was super old. It was all steel, which is probably the only thing that saved me from that rear ending, from not getting massively injured in that. But anyway, I was trying to roll the window down and realized that I couldn't get it down fast enough. And I was trying to unlock my seatbelt to get out when I saw the semi-truck jackknifing, trying to avoid me. And then I felt the front end of it like hit my car. I felt the semi-truck hit the front end of my car, and then I don't remember anything. Everything like went black, and then there was no fear, and there was no pain, and there was no anything. It was just like floating in the abyss is kind of how I would describe that. The feeling that came to me in that moment was there was no time, and it was just pure peace. And after realizing that, then I started to realize that I was connected to everything all in one. It's a lot how people would describe, the universal energy is in everything. So it kind of felt like I had been pulled into that universal energy source, and I was quite literally just a part of everything. And there was no fear, there was no pain, there was nothing bad at all. It was all just very peaceful and loving. And then I had this moment of realization, kind of like a question, am I an individual? And then after that moment, like momentary realization, I quite literally slammed back into my body. And that was very jarring. I remember like being almost thrown back into my body and taking this really big breath of air, and realized that I was quite literally on the side of the road in a ditch, and was about 10 to 15 feet away from the accident site. No idea how I got there. And I remember feeling the gravel under me. I remember starting to feel the sensations coming back to my body, like lots of pain. And then getting up and trying to walk, because like I was looking around and realized that there was nobody even checking on my car. Like there was nobody around me at all, but there was a bunch of people on the other side of the road. And my first thought was, I need help. And so, like, I was so shaken that I couldn't even talk. I was like trying to call for help and I couldn't get any sound to come out. And so, not being in my right state of mind, I was like, I'll just walk over there. So I stood up and started walking, and the closest way to get through was in between the semi truck and my car, but there was only about that much space, as I was like not in my right mind trying to put my leg in between those spaces so I could just go the shortest distance. But there was only about that much room in between the semi truck and my car, which was very confusing because I remember the semi truck like crushing into my car. And then I walked around, and I remember walking, like leaning on my car to get around it. And then I just remember collapsing on the other side of the road to try to get help. And there was a bunch of construction workers over on that other side of the intersection. And some of them happened to be emergency service members. So they rushed over to me and started, holding me really still, thinking that I probably had spinal fractures or cervical fractures. But yeah, there had already, when I woke up, there was already police on the scene. There was already, like, I was hearing the emergency sirens going, but nobody, as far as I knew, had even checked on my vehicle because they didn't think anyone would have survived what I had, even the impact from the rear end that I had sustained. But yeah, I spent the whole day in the hospital after that. I don't remember any of that. I had an MRI or like a CAT scan and don't remember any of that. I remember having to go back to the hospital like the second or third day after the accident because I couldn't keep food down because the swelling was so bad from the concussion that I had gotten. But yeah, there was no way that I would have actually been able to get out of the car because I remember trying to roll the window down and I remember trying to unlock my seatbelt, and neither of which were working really. And then I remember the crushing of the front end, like instantaneously, like momentarily, and then I was just not there. So it was, having that happen at 17 was quite an experience to live through. Because, yeah, how else do you explain waking up like that?
Willow, thank you for sharing your experience with us. Did you experience the impact of the semi at all and any of the pain?
No, I didn't. I remember like seeing it hit the front of my car, and I remember the front end kind of crushing toward me, and then I blacked out. I was just not in my body anymore. Yeah, there was no memory of, I don't have any memory of that being a painful moment. I do remember when I got hit from behind where it pushed me into the oncoming traffic. I remember like slamming up against the door of my car, even with my seatbelt on. I remember that being really painful in my shoulder. But I don't remember there being any other pain from that.
At the point of the impact, everything went black. Does that mean that there was some sort of time delay and then you wound up in this black realm, or you immediately went to a black realm?
It felt kind of like there was a time delay, and it's hard to explain because there wasn't this feeling of time even existing. Like it felt like it had taken forever being in that space of just everything in one, all being connected. And it also felt like it went by in a flash. It was a very strange, I don't really know how to describe what that felt like entirely. Because when I was there, I remember it feeling like it went on for eons. But when I came back into my body, it felt like I had only been in that liminal space for a second. So it was really strange how that happened. But before I got to that understanding that I was like in everything all at once and everything was in me at once and we were all connected, before I got to that mindset, it was kind of just dark. Like everything was dark and I was just sort of a thought, almost, is the best way that I can, like, I didn't have like a physical body. It was really interesting.
So it was completely black. You didn't see anything. Was it kind of thick and velvety?
A little bit, yeah. It kind of felt like, if I were going to describe some sort of sensation or feeling with it, almost liquidy, like viscous in some way. It felt very flowy. That's the best way I can think of that. I do have like some flashes of it. Almost kind of, when I think back on the memory of that, it almost kind of looked like a really dark part of the galaxy, like very far out. There were some flashes or streaks of light, but that was it. Uh, yeah, there wasn't a lot going on.
It's fascinating. While you were in this realm, you were one with everything. And then the instant you thought about being separate, being an individual, you became an individual again, snapped back into your body.
That is, I actually have never thought about it like that before. That's a super interesting take on that. Yeah, I remember being everything all at once, and then real like questioning, am I an individual? Uh, and then, yeah, slamming right back in. So that's a very interesting take on that.
So, how do you think you got out of the car? I mean, is it possibly you went flying through the window as it shattered, or
I had
actually,
my seatbelt on.
oh,
Yeah, I
oh,
had
you
my
had your
seatbelt
seatbelt.
on.
Okay, that's true. You had
Yeah.
your seatbelt on. You didn't have any cuts on you, right?
Mm-mm.
So then, do you think like a spirit guide or an angel got you out?
Potentially. The only explanation that I had, because my window wouldn't roll down. I remember it getting like maybe an inch down. Um, and weirdly enough, and this is something I don't even understand, a lot of people were questioning this, how my vehicle's windows didn't break out by the rear impact, because quite literally my trunk was in my back seat. I'm in this little four-door sedan from 1970s. They estimated the only reason that it was even still like partly a car was because it was all steel. Um, because I got hit by an F-350, and those were really big, and they going like 70 miles per hour is what was estimated. And I was at a standstill. So the only reason that my car was even noticeably still a car was probably because it was steel, but like it didn't make any sense how the windows didn't break out. Um, I still had my seatbelt on because I remember trying to get my seatbelt off and it wouldn't unbuckle. And I remember the front end coming toward me. Like, I remember that impact of the semi hitting my car. Um, and then just the whole experience of universal energy is, I guess, the best way I can describe that. And then landing back into my body. Uh, and I mean, like 10 to 15 feet away from that crash site. So even if I were to have been able to get my seatbelt off and get the door open somehow, um, it doesn't explain how I got so far away from the car.
Do you remember whether your driver's window was still intact or not?
It was. It was still intact.
Wow,
Yeah. Hmm.
that's amazing.
Yeah. So when the reality that I woke up in, the car had only been rear-ended. Everything was still intact when it came to the glass in the car. Um, the one thing that I thought was more notable was the impact was so strong from being rear-ended that it sheared the bolts off underneath the seat, the driver's seat, because it had crushed the frame so profoundly that you could just lift the seat up out of the car, and those bolts are thicker than my thumb. Um, and there's four of them, and it was just completely detached. So that was a really big impact. And then, yeah, I don't really have a huge explanation outside of the information that I've come to, the conclusion that I've come to is that I jumped timelines in some way, that I died in one timeline and that I woke up in another, um, simply because there's no reasonable explanation that anyone was able to come to for, how I ended up outside of the car in the first place. Not only that, but I quite literally have a very vivid memory of that impact of the front end. um, and being hit. And then when I woke up, the car wasn't ever hit in the front end. So it's some pretty stark contrasts in what I remember happening and then what I woke up to.
Are you saying that in another timeline, your body died and perhaps you woke up in this timeline in a body that actually got out of the car?
Yes, I am saying that. There's actually been, which I find this really amazing, there's been a lot of scientific studies just the last 2 years that have come out more so, including from Google has done a lot of studies on this. They just came out with a chip called the Willow chip that has confirmed multi-dimensional timelines, parallel realities. So pretty amazing in that way. But this was the thought that had come to me before I ever knew about that, was that I had woken up in a different alternative timeline because, and it was the only explanation that made sense to me too. Because when I started to heal from the accident, I was realizing that the people around me were very different from what I remember them being. So when I'm talking about family that I lived with at the time, I was only 17. So my mom, my dad, my brother, really close best friends of mine, they all seemed a little different to me. They looked very much the same, but their mannerisms were different. I remember thinking that how they spoke was quite different. Just the different words that they were using, different sayings that they would use, and everybody seemed to be using collectively the same sayings, but I hadn't really heard those sayings before, and grew up with all of them, so seemed very strange to me. And I remember my own family telling me um, that I seemed very different as well, that I didn't seem like the same person. So that to me was also part of why I came to that conclusion of I think that I jumped timelines. And then all the scientific research that's come out in the last 2 years that's been made more public surrounding there being parallel timelines and the multiverse, multidimensional universe, uh, and that being proven as an actual existence made sense to me.
Before you came to that conclusion, what was going through your mind as you were interacting with all these people and everybody seemed different?
Well, being so young, it was just really frustrating to me because I didn't understand um, why I was so different to them because I felt the same to me, and why they were so different to me because I remember very distinctly there being times where I really missed my family, even though they were right with me. They didn't seem like the same people. Um, it was really difficult for a long time to try and emotionally work through all of that with feeling like my family wasn't mine anymore. So that's been a long road in and of itself. But after the accident, I do remember feeling like it was kind of a big wake up call in a sense, um, of like taking time to enjoy life in different ways and making sure that I'm not rushing through everything because before the accident, I was go, go, go all the time, trying to get all these different things done off my checklist to make sure that, you know, I was saving for college and make sure that I was doing all the things in school so I could get to a good college. Uh, and that was my main focus. But after the accident, I was really forced to take time um, to heal and recover, and also to take time to understand that life isn't meant to just be rushed through. So everything felt a little brighter in that way. I felt more like a young kid again in the way of, well, responsibilities are always going to be there, but life isn't. So I need to make sure that I'm enjoying it to the fullest extent. Yeah.
How did you change spiritually after this experience?
Oh, well, I was always pretty tapped in spiritually, even as a child. Lots of paranormal experiences, even growing up as a little kid. And I didn't really talk about them with too many people. So I think the thing that really changed in that regard was that I was more open to speaking with the experiences I was having with other people that I knew and trusted, because I felt that those experiences were more important after having been one with everything for a little while there, and realizing that we're all very interconnected energetically. Through that experience, even with being an empath before that, really opened me up to having a lot more understanding for people around me that I didn't have as much understanding for before, just in the way of being accepting that everyone has their own path. Um, and sometimes that path goes against ours, and there's not too much we can do about it but learn and move forward in a different direction. So it really brought a lot of awareness and understanding to me, and opened up my mind, um, to being more accepting of others, and to, to being open to this idea of everybody has their own journey and path.
After this accident, did you get any new abilities that could be considered psychic?
Ooh, yes. After this accident, I wasn't just seeing spirits. I was actually communicating with them. I had always been in communication with animals around me. Even as a child, I always just thought I had a really overactive imagination. And I never really talked about it too much with other people because I thought it was just kind of a game that I was playing when I was a kid. But then as I got older, I became an animal trainer with horses and dogs and other animals, chickens even. I grew up on a farm and realized that the conversations that I was having with them, they were actually understanding, because they would then do what I was asking of them when I was training them. Um, so it opened up my abilities in that way to a strong degree, to connecting in very intently, and consciously, not just thinking that I was playing a game. It opened me up to speaking with spirits instead of just being so afraid of them, because when I was younger, I was just really afraid of them. And I would see them and sometimes I would hear them, but I would never try to communicate with them. And then after this accident, I really started more openly communicating with them, and telling them when I didn't want them around, or telling them, asking questions surrounding their death, or asking questions surrounding why they were there. Um, so it opened me up to a lot of understanding in the way of how connected we are with everything, even if we can't visually see things around us, but we can feel them and we can understand that there's something there. And then you can communicate if you have intention behind it.
Now, you've had some other experiences as well. So let's move on to your second one.
Okay, so my second one, I'm laughing because, and I don't know if you want to have this in there or not, but I was laughing because it's like I don't typically talk about this stuff with people, right? You have so many experiences in your life, and it's almost like people look at you like you're trying to ask for attention by telling other people about what you've been through. But the second paranormal experience that I had, like I said, I had grown up on a farm, and we had this 3-story barn that came with the property, and we had horses on the property. And I always disliked this barn. Every time I went into the top levels, there was like this top level, and then there was a loft above, an open loft above that on either side. I always felt like something was watching me, and it always creeped me out. I remember every time if I went out to feed the horses and it was dark outside already, I would run up, throw hay, and run down as quick as I could. I hated being up there. Um, but I remember this one time I went up there and there was nobody at home. I had gotten home from school kind of late, and I decided to go throw some hay for the horses and go spend some time with them. And so I was in the upper level of the barn, and I was about ready to throw some hay down into their field, and I heard a noise behind me. And I didn't think to turn around and look because I was scared. I just wanted to get in and get out and be done. And then all of a sudden, I remember, like, I felt something hit me really hard, and then everything went dark. Um, and it was very much along that same line of going back into that liminal space, going back into that void kind of feeling connected with everything, but also one and the same. And when I woke up, I don't know how it had been a few hours after the initial impact, and it was dark outside. And I remember I couldn't stand up. I was trying to crawl toward the door. Thankfully, I had my phone on me. It was just like one of those little flip phones that we had in high school. And I called my parents because they weren't home when I had gotten out in the barn in the first place. Um, and so I called them and they rushed out and got me. And I just remember being carried into the house. I had gone to the ER and gotten another MRI and all these because head injury. And I don't remember any of that. But what I found out after the fact was that I had gotten hit by a water reservoir that we had for the horse trailer when we would go on camping trips. This water reservoir is around 150 pounds, incredibly heavy to lift. It's huge, probably like 6 foot in length and 3 foot wide at a minimum. It's a big half circle, kind of dome shape to it, and long. You put on top of a trailer and fill it with water. And it had been in the loft of the barn. So I was on the main level and then it's the upper loft part. And it was setting on the floor of the loft. It has a flat side to it. Um, and it was completely set on the floor of the loft. It had been there for months and there was no way that it could have moved on its own. I don't know a single person in my life who would have been able to actually throw it. But it was up there and then somehow launched across the barn. Like I was probably a good, I'm going to say 12 feet from where that would have been to the other end of the barn, maybe even further, estimating here. But it had to have launched itself somehow across the barn length and hit me right in the back and in back of my head. So yeah, nobody was at the property except for me that I knew of.
So you think it was a ghost or something that threw it at you?
As crazy as it sounds, it wasn't the first experience I had with a poltergeist in that barn. Um, Another notable, not near death experience, but I was in the bottom of the barn looking for something. My dad had a bunch of tools and different things down there, and I was out there looking for something that he needed. And I remember hearing something in the bottom of the barn, thinking maybe it was a raccoon or we lived out in the woods. And so I was kind of wary of it a little bit because wild animals are a little unpredictable. So I was trying to hurry up and look for something. And then I heard a noise again and I turned around and looked behind me. And my dad had this huge wrench. He used to work on, machinery and different things. And so this wrench was probably 3 feet tall and it was hung up on the barn wall. And I remember watching it come out from the barn wall, like from the hook it was on, and then dropping back into the wall. And that was the noise that I was hearing. And there was nothing there that I could see visually, but the wrench was just moving and dropping back into the wall. That was one of the first experiences I had with a poltergeist in that barn. And I didn't usually have the experiences like that down in the lower level of the barn. They were usually in the upper level. Weird noises, just things would kind of be strange. But that was a really big one I remember seeing and being really scared and ran out. Um, but then that instance with the water reservoir was the biggest experience that I had in that situation. And thankfully woke up, but seeing as how it was still that experience of going back to the liminal space, it makes me wonder, is that another timeline shift that I experienced? Did I actually wake up as the same person or did I wake up on a different timeline? I asked that a lot about that experience.
Did this happen after your first NDE or before?
It was after. It was probably close to a year after.
Did any other family members have problems going in the barn?
Majority of them did not like the upper level. A lot of my friends would even comment if they came over to the property that they didn't like being in the barn, that they felt creeped out by being in the upper level. Um, my house was notoriously haunted. That whole property was really haunted. We grew up about 5 miles from a known Indian burial ground in that area. And the house had sat vacant for somewhere around 3 years before we even moved into it, because the entire community in that area had heard the stories about that property and didn't want anything to do with it. We were moving in from a different state, so we didn't know anything about it, and it was pretty active. None of my friends would even spend the night with me. I would always go and spend the night at their house because we would hear footsteps up and down the stairs. We'd hear doors opening and closing. We would hear one time we had heard a dog growl. There was no dog there, so it was pretty. There was a lot going on.
Were your parents surprised how that thing that hit you got, moved across the barn?
Yeah, nobody mentioned anything about it. I remember questioning, how could that have happened? Um, Definitely afraid to go back in the barn after that, but I don't remember there being any actual conversations surrounding what could have happened with that. Um, Family was very much the type of, if we don't understand, we brush it under the rug, especially with the property that we were living on. I mean, my whole family had a name for the ghost. We called him, I think it was Harry or Frank, or maybe both. But we would say one or the other because there was always two cupboards in the kitchen that would just randomly open and close. And it didn't matter if people were there or not; they would just open and close all the time. And so we just started naming them because it was such a well-known thing. But I don't remember my parents ever having any conversation with me about how that could have possibly occurred.
You're thinking that maybe you jumped timelines again. So after this happened, did your family seem even more different?
Not as much from what I remember. I do remember distancing myself from everybody at that point.
And why
Being
would
pretty
you?
traumatized.
Oh, I was going to say, why did you distance yourself?
Yeah, I felt kind of ostracized in a way because after the first experience, everybody was telling me that I was so different. And I felt that they were all really different. And I was trying to kind of reincorporate myself into what their life was, which felt also very different from what I had remembered it before the accident. Um, and feeling that distance between them and myself energetically, of not being super accepted after, because they thought that like I was just so different than they remembered. Um, and then having something similar happen again, just the whole experience of it. And then nobody really taking the time to ask the questions or to make sure that I was okay. Um, I didn't feel very accepted. So I decided that I wasn't going to talk about my experience with that and just kind of distance myself from my family.
This time you were also in the black void and you were experiencing being one with everybody or everything. Did you have that thought about being an individual again and that's what brought you back, or you just spontaneously came back?
That second time with the barn, it was more spontaneously. I don't remember thinking that or asking if I was an individual still. I just remember feeling at peace again and, actually feeling cared for and loved, and then just kind of waking up in pain. Um, yeah, I don't remember that I thought if I was an individual or not. I don't think I asked that question that time.
All right, let's fast forward to your third experience.
So this experience actually has happened before the car accident. This happened when I was 14. I had I had a cyst on my ovary, and I didn't know it was there. I had never had any medical issues in this regard prior to this. Woke up to go let the dogs out. It was very early in the morning. I was going down the stairs, and the pain just hit me like a ton of bricks. I ended up buckling on the stairs and falling down half of them because I couldn't walk. Um, Thankfully, my brother was home, and it was such a quick thing that neither of us knew what to do. And I was in so much pain, like I couldn't hardly talk. And my mom was already at work. So what happened was my brother called my mom, and my mom had him take me to the hospital because he was of age to be able to drive. So he rushed me into the hospital. And I remember him carrying me into the hospital, and it was a nightmare from that point forward. That whole day was a nightmare. Um, the doctor's office didn't know initially what was going on with me. The ER didn't know. And so there was a bunch of tests being run. But first, they wanted to give me medicine in order to stop me from throwing up because the pain was so severe that I couldn't stop. And it was to the point where like my arms were seizing up and it was pulling my IV out. So they had to give me something in order to stop all of that from happening. So they gave me an anti-nausea medicine, uh, not knowing that and at that point in time, I had no idea that I was so sensitive to medications. They gave me an anti-nausea medicine, and I remember things kind of going still. It's sort of like when you lose your hearing, if you start to black out almost, like lose your hearing, and everything kind of goes tunnel vision. And I remember that starting to happen. And I remember my mom getting really panicked and looking at me because she worked at the hospital. So she was there at that point, um, and yelling at me to breathe. And I remember laughing at her, like in my mind. I thought I was saying it out loud, but I guess I was just saying it in my mind of like, I am breathing. What are you talking about? And then I just remember my muscles getting really tight and my whole body clamped up. And then I just went blank. Um, it was at that point that my mom had said I had started turning blue and that I started to flatline. And they came in and started giving me medicine to reverse the effects. Um, and then I started to come to and started to wake up and breathe again after, like, right after they gave me the reversal medication. Um, yeah. So in that one in particular, I didn't quite get to the void, but I do remember being pulled down a tunnel almost. It was like you go to tunnel vision and you kind of black out. But in this particular situation, it felt like I was being pulled backwards into kind of a dark space that felt very peaceful. But I didn't quite get to that understanding that I was connected with everything before I got brought back.
Were you clinically dead?
I didn't get pronounced dead. I know that much. My mom said, because she was there for the whole thing, my mom said that it had started to flatline, like the monitor started to flatline right before they got the reversal medication in me. So it was only for a momentary lapse of time that that happened. So they didn't actually pronounce me dead, but it was enough to where I felt like I was being pulled into this dark hallway almost, but it wasn't scary feeling. It was just kind of calm. I don't know how else to describe that. It was very all the experiences I've had once I wasn't consciously in the physical anymore felt very relaxed and peaceful and calm. Um, right up until I got brought back to reality. And then things started to get a little crazy.
Do you fear death?
I don't fear the transition of death. Um, Death itself doesn't seem scary to me at all. It seems kind of like a break almost from reality. But from everything that I know in speaking with others who have passed over, you still have a job. It's not that liminal space for forever. Um, that's sort of the reprieve until you get put into the next portion of your journey, which might not include a physical body, but you're still an energy and you still have things that need to happen and to learn. Um, but the part that I do have some fear around is, what leads to dying. That part to me seems a little concerning, just depending on what it could be.
Where do you think you're at now on your journey?
Ooh, well, now on my journey, I am working as a Reiki master energy healer. I've studied many different energetic healing modalities and use a lot of different techniques within my practice. So I call it quantum Reiki because of that. Um, I help people discover timelines in their own lives and how to navigate to the one that's best for them. in their path moving forward. I consider myself a quantum alchemist because I help people understand how to experience emotions, take the lesson from what the emotion is telling us, and move forward in a way that propels them into a better space on their path. How to break out of limiting beliefs.
Are there any common limiting beliefs that people share over and over again?
Yes, so many. One of the biggest ones comes down to a belief that they are not worthy of receiving love. And most people tend to do so many different things in order to protect themselves from this idea that they're not then worthy of receiving that love, right? So somebody might come in and offer that love in one way or another, friendship or romantic relationship, and they will, if this is the held belief, they will then sabotage themselves within that friendship or that relationship as a way to push away the possibility of being rejected at some point in time. And a lot of people don't know that that's what they're doing. A lot of people aren't completely conscious that that's what's happening. But when we get down to the core held limiting beliefs of somebody's psyche, um, there can be some really simplistic sounding ones that cause so much chaos in people's lives.
Can you give us another one?
Yeah. Another one would be fear of success. That's a huge one for a lot of people because they hold on to everything that they've been through in their past, everything negative that they've been through in their past, and they form their personality and how they react in the world, how they move through the world around all of these negative things that have happened to them. So they can't let that stuff go in order to move into a more successful version of self. Now they don't feel like they're worthy of success because all this stuff happened to them. It must be something wrong with them. So instead of taking the lessons from those situations or experiences and moving forward in a more positive way from it, they hold on to it as thinking that they are broken intrinsically. And now they can't move forward into a more positive, successful state. Um, Once people are able to let those experiences go, forgive themselves through holding on to that for so long, learn the lessons from those experiences that they can, and move forward with the positive that may have come out, the different understandings that may have come out from those experiences, and focus on that, then they can really step into a more successful timeline without holding on to this hugely limiting fear of success.
If you had a friend that was suffering over the loss of a loved one, what type of advice would you give?
Well, that has happened. And a lot of the times, especially if it was more recent that somebody had passed over, messages will come through from the passed over loved one. And I always try to relay those if the person who's grieving is receptive to that information. But overall, typically what comes through is that they're not in pain, that they feel good again, that they're not scared or concerned about anything, um, and that there's no reason their loved ones should have to worry, that they know they're not there in the physical anymore, but they're still with them energetically. They're still going to help guide them through that person's life. Um, is more along the lines of what comes through than anything else, unless there's something specific they wanted to say to that person for whatever experience they had had together in their living time. So what I would say to somebody would just be to hopefully have an understanding that their energy, their essence is still with them on their path, that they're not in any sort of energetic space that they're fearful of in any way, um, that there's more to learn and it's just a transitional period.
Willow, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yes, completely. It's what my business is. That's what I do full time. Is I help people through near-death experiences. I help people let go of the limiting beliefs. I help people reprogram their subconscious mind so that they can move forward in a really positive way. and provide the different tools and understanding between energy work, neuroscience, psychology, and quantum physics to be able to really accomplish that and step into the version of themselves that they've always wanted to be.
What's the best way to reach you?
So willowsquest.com is my website, and all my information is on there. They can also email me directly through goldenwillow.reiki@gmail.com.
What type of problems do near-death experiencers have that they need help with?
Near-death experiences come with a myriad of different things that can happen. A lot of people tend to realize that life is precious. A lot of people tend to have an expansive perspective surrounding what it means to actually be alive and why we're here. And I think the biggest help that I've been able to offer is to help guide people with that bigger perspective and understanding of why we're here, because they tend to have this soul calling that comes in, of what their purpose is here in this life, and sometimes they have a hard time figuring out what they can do with that understanding, and it feels like such a strong pull to it, such a strong call that you can't ignore it after having a near-death experience. So helping them to figure out how they can utilize their current abilities, their current knowledge with this soul calling, to incorporate that into their life so that they can also live out their life mission.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Connecting in with your inner sense of self, with the you that your 5-year-old self would have been proud of, is one of the most important things that you can do for yourself moving forward in life. When you connect in with that inner sense of self, it's an understanding of who you have the potential to become in this lifetime. And it shows you all the different steps that you could take in order to get there.
Willow, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's been wonderful. Very much appreciate you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.